In a time when family agreements were worth more than feelings, she grew up believing that her destiny was already set. To marry the brilliant son of an influential family, sealing the union between two great estates. But upon returning to the land where it all began, she discovers that not all love is planned, and that the heart sometimes insists on following paths that no one expected. Hello, my friends. I am Linda, and this is Linda Love Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. In the spring of 1915, when the wildflowers were blooming and the air carried the scent of damp earth, two families celebrated the birth of their children in the small rural region of Meadowvale. At the Blackwood farm, little Annabel came into the world amid laughter and tears of joy, while on the neighbouring property, separated only by an aged wooden fence, Arthur Darcy, the second son of the family, was born with curious eyes that seemed eager to uncover all the secrets of the universe. "Just look at this," commented Samuel Blackwood to his neighbour and longtime friend Edward Darcy, as the two admired their respective babies during one of the many Sunday gatherings the families shared. Born on the same day. It seems destiny brought them together before they could even walk. The family's properties shared not only land, but stories. The fence that separated them was more of a formality than a barrier. In the years that followed, the childish laughter of Annabel and Arthur echoed across the fields as they ran and played under the summer sun. Thomas, the elder son of the Darcys, 3 years older than they were, occasionally joined in the games, although he preferred to help his father with the farm chores. Annabel was a little girl with vibrant green eyes and brown hair that fell in unruly curls. She had a free spirit and a laugh that infected everyone around her. Arthur, on the other hand, was more reserved, with perfectly combed blonde hair and an insatiable curiosity about how things worked. Even at that tender age, his blue eyes shone when he took apart toys to understand their mechanisms. On a particularly memorable afternoon, when they were both 5 years old, Arthur gave Annabel a small music box he had fixed. The gentle melody enchanted the girl, who hugged her friend tightly. Neither of them imagined that this would be the last gift they would exchange for many years. "We need to talk to you," announced Margaret Blackwood to the Darcy friends during a dinner. The silence that followed was as heavy as the storm clouds forming on the horizon. "My uncle has passed away and left us his farm in the east. It's an opportunity we can't refuse." The news of the Blackwoods' departure hit the family's friendship like a lightning bolt. It was during the last night, while the adults shared a bottle of wine by candlelight, that the idea emerged. "Our families have always been united," said Edward Darcy, looking at his wife Eleanor and then at their friends. "And what if one day, when they grow up, Annabel and Arthur got married? It would be perfect, our lands united, our families officially intertwined." Samuel Blackwood raised his glass, his eyes sparkling with the prospect. "An agreement between gentlemen. When the time is right, our children will unite in marriage." The mothers exchanged worried glances, but did not dare to object. It was a time when matrimonial agreements were still common, especially among landowning families. On the morning of the departure, Annabel cried, clinging to her music box, while Arthur, with the dignity of his 5 years, promised to write letters. Thomas, at 8 years old, watched the scene from the porch, feeling a strange sadness at the departure of the brown-haired girl, who always smiled in his direction. 15 years passed like pages turned by the wind. The Blackwood farm in the east thrived beyond expectations. Annabel grew up far from the childhood memories of Meadowvale, becoming a young woman of 20, with the same contagious laughter, but now possessing the elegance and education of a lady. The letters between the families continued for a few years, but gradually became less frequent until they almost completely ceased. When Samuel Blackwood announced they would return to Meadowvale to renovate their old property, Annabel felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Her heart held only fragments of that place, the scent of pine trees, the distant sound of the stream, a music box melody. "Remember the agreement, dear," Margaret commented while packing. "You and Arthur Darcy, your father and Edward always kept that promise alive." Annabel felt a knot in her stomach. "Mother, I can't marry someone I barely remember." What if we don't get along? What if I don't love him? Margaret smiled with that condescension only mothers can express. My daughter, love is something you learn. With me and your father, it was like that. You'll see. You will learn to love Arthur. The journey back was long, but with every kilometre, Annabel grew closer to a destiny she hadn't chosen. As she watched the landscape change through the carriage window, her thoughts danced between curiosity about who Arthur had become and fear of a predetermined future. When they finally arrived at Meadowvale, the first sight of the old property caused a nostalgic pang in her chest. But it was the view of the neighbouring farm that truly surprised her. The Darcys' property, which in her childhood memories had already been beautiful, now displayed lush fields stretching as far as the eye could see, new barns, and a main house that had been expanded and beautified. They really thrived, murmured Samuel, a mix of admiration and a twinge of envy in his voice. The reunion of the families was warm, as if time had not passed. Edward and Eleanor Darcy had aged gracefully, and the friendship between the couples seemed to rekindle instantly amidst laughter and shared stories. Arthur is in the capital finishing his studies, Eleanor explained, pouring tea into delicate porcelain cups. He has become a brilliant student. He returns in a few weeks in time for... She left the sentence hanging, exchanging a meaningful glance with Margaret. In time to properly meet Annabel, Edward completed with a smile. We are sure it will be a promising meeting. After all, it will be an excellent business to unite our lands through this marriage. Annabel maintained her polite smile, but her heart clenched. There it was again, the idea of her marriage being discussed as a commercial transaction. The days that followed were full of intense activity. The two families began to work together to renovate the Blackwood estate. Fences were removed, the boundaries between the farms began to dissolve, and the work of modernising the house and barns began. It was during a morning inspection of the property's boundaries that Annabel encountered Thomas Darcy again. She was walking absent-mindedly down a muddy path after a recent rain, admiring how the landscape had changed when she heard the sound of hooves approaching rapidly. "Watch out!" shouted a male voice, but the warning came too late. The horse braked sharply, startled by Annabel's sudden presence, and its rider, while trying to control the animal, was thrown forward. In an instant, both the man and Annabel were lying in a puddle of mud. "Are you okay?" he asked, quickly standing up and extending his hand to help her. "I didn't see you until it was too late." Annabel accepted the offered hand, feeling the strength in his calloused fingers as he pulled her up. When she finally straightened, she faced a pair of intense brown eyes watching her with concern. The man was tall, with broad shoulders, dishevelled dark hair, and a stubble that gave him a rugged look. "I'm fine, just covered in mud," she replied, trying to maintain her dignity while cleaning off her ruined dress. "Thomas Darcy," he introduced himself with a small bow that seemed out of place given the awkward situation. "And you must be Annabel Blackwood, our former neighbour and my brother's fiancée." There was something in his tone, perhaps a touch of irony, that made Annabel narrow her eyes. "And you must be the brother who prefers staying on the farm rather than seeking education in the capital." The words came out more bitter than she intended, a reflection of the conversations she had overheard in recent days. Arthur's parents frequently mentioned how Thomas was reluctant to progress, even lazy, preferring manual labour over studies. A crooked smile appeared on Thomas's lips. "I see you've heard about me. Yes, I'm the disappointing son who prefers to get his hands dirty rather than read books all day." "I didn't mean to offend you," Annabel hastened to say, feeling guilty for her rudeness. "Not offended," he replied, shrugging. "The truth rarely offends. Now, allow me to escort you back to the main house. It's the least I can do after ruining your dress." On the way back, Annabel noticed how the farm workers greeted Thomas with genuine respect. A young boy approached to ask about a fence that needed repair. Another inquired about the best time to harvest a particular field. "It seems you do more than just dirty your hands," she commented when they finally reached the house. Thomas stopped, looking at her with curiosity. "Appearances can be deceiving, Miss Blackwood. Something that is good to remember, especially when you're about to marry a man you haven't seen in 15 years. With those words, he bid farewell with a slight nod of his head, leaving Annabel with a strange sense of unease. In the weeks that followed, Annabel encountered Thomas several times as he oversaw work on the estates. Each meeting began with some exchange of barbs, but invariably ended with longer, more meaningful conversations. She discovered that, despite not having attended universities, Thomas was incredibly intelligent and knew every inch of the farms like the back of his hand. "Why did you never want to study abroad?" she asked one afternoon, as they watched the workers planting a new row of fruit trees. Thomas was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Because someone needed to stay. My father had big dreams for Arthur, saw in him the bright future of the family, and someone needed to keep everything running while he built that future." There was a resignation in his voice that touched Annabel deeply. For the first time, she saw beyond the facade of indifference that Thomas maintained. "You don't resent your brother for that?" Thomas smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed his face. "Arthur? No, he's brilliant in his own way, always has been, and we get along in our own way." As the days passed, Annabel found herself looking for Thomas, yearning for the moments when their paths crossed. There was something about him, a raw authenticity, that attracted her like a magnet. The ironic comments gave way to shared smiles, and the conversations became more personal, deeper. One night, while walking alone in the Blackwood garden, Annabel found a small package on the porch with her name on it. Inside was a restored music box, the same one Arthur had given her when they were children, and that had been damaged during the move. "Thomas fixed it," Margaret explained when she saw her daughter with the gift. "I found it among our things and mentioned that it was broken. He offered to repair it." Annabel turned the small lever, and the sweet melody brought tears to her eyes. Not just because of the childhood memory, but because of Thomas's gesture. It was then that she realized she was falling in love with the wrong brother. The arrival of Arthur Darcy was announced with great enthusiasm by the families. A special dinner was prepared, and Annabel felt her stomach churn with anxiety as she got ready. When she finally saw him, Annabel had to admit that Arthur had become an attractive man. As tall as his brother, but more slender, with well-groomed blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, he was the image of sophistication. His clothes were impeccable, his manners refined, and his conversation, although a bit formal, was intelligent and pleasant. However, throughout the dinner, Annabel couldn't help but notice the absence of Thomas, who had claimed he needed to check on a problem with the cattle. In the days that followed, Annabel and Arthur were obliged to spend time together, walking through the gardens and talking about trivialities. He was polite, but distant, as if fulfilling an obligation. There was no warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, nor the enthusiasm that her parents had described. During one of these walks, Annabel noticed Thomas working in one of the barns in the distance. Their eyes met briefly, and she felt her heart race. "You and my brother seem to have become friends," Arthur commented, following the direction of her gaze. "He has been very kind in showing me the changes in the region," she replied, trying to sound casual. Arthur nodded, a small enigmatic smile on his lips. "Thomas has always been the guardian of these lands. He knows every piece, every story." There was a note of admiration in his voice that surprised Annabel. "Do you not resent him for staying with the farm while you study?" Arthur laughed, a genuine sound that made him seem younger. "Resent? Not at all. Thomas loves this place in a way I never did. For me, the land is a resource to be studied and improved. For him, it is a home, an identity." That evening, the families gathered for dinner to formally discuss the wedding. The atmosphere was festive, with champagne being served and plans being laid out as if the future were a map already drawn. "I propose a date for the end of autumn," suggested Edward Darcy, raising his glass. "The harvest will be done, and the weather will be perfect for a celebration." Annabel looked at Arthur, who maintained the same polite smile, but whose eyes seemed as restless as hers. Neither of them spoke, allowing their parents to continue with their plans. Later that night, unable to sleep, Annabel opened her bedroom window, letting the cool night breeze caress her face. The sound of a small stone hitting the wood startled her. Looking down, she saw Thomas standing in the garden, his face partially illuminated by the moonlight. Without thinking twice, she quietly descended the stairs and exited through the back door. Thomas was waiting for her under the shadow of a large oak tree, his features tense in the moonlight. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, even though her heart sang at the sight of him. "Nor should you be out here, meeting with the wrong brother," he replied, a hint of bitterness in his voice. "Thomas, you cannot marry him," he interrupted, his voice more intense. "You don't love him." The statement caught her by surprise with its bluntness. "Who do you think you are to tell me what I can or cannot do?" she asked, a defensive irritation rising. Thomas took a step forward, his expression softening. "I am the man you love and who loves you," he said, the words spilling out in a desperate impulse. The silence that followed was filled only with the distant sound of crickets and the rapid beating of their hearts. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, they moved closer, and their lips met in a kiss that seemed to hold all the unspoken words between them. When they finally parted, Annabel rested her forehead against Thomas's chest, feeling the strong rhythm of his heart. "What are we going to do?" she murmured. "I don't know," he replied honestly. "But I know I can't watch you marry my brother knowing how I feel about you." The next morning, with a heavy heart and a determined mind, Annabel accompanied Arthur on another walk through the gardens. Their parents watched from afar, hopeful smiles on their faces, while Thomas worked in the barn, his gaze occasionally wandering in their direction. "Arthur," she began, gathering courage, "I need to be honest with you. I can't marry you because I'm in love with someone else." To her complete surprise, Arthur began to laugh, a genuine laugh of relief. "You don't know the weight you've taken off my shoulders," he confessed, his eyes shining in a way she had never seen before. "I'm also in love with someone else, a friend I met in the capital." The confession left Annabel momentarily speechless. "But you never said anything. You seem to be accepting the marriage." Arthur sighed, looking at their parents in the distance. "Like you, I was raised to honor family commitments, and part of me thought that maybe we could make it work, find some kind of companionship. So we're both trapped in a promise made by our parents when we were children," she observed with a sad smile. "Unless we do something about it," Arthur suggested, a new determination in his voice. "Let's talk to them together." The atmosphere in the Darcys' living room was tense when Annabel and Arthur announced their decision. The parents' faces shifted between surprise, disappointment, and finally, resigned acceptance. "We understand your concerns," said Samuel Blackwood after a long silence. "But our farms are already united. It would be ideal to have a marriage between the families." "I will marry Annabel," announced a firm voice from the doorway. Thomas entered the room, his gaze fixed on Annabel. "Of course, if she will have me." The shock on the faces of those present was palpable, but Thomas continued, addressing Annabel's parents directly. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, I am in love with Annabel, and I believe she loves me too. I would like to ask for your blessing to marry her." Annabel felt her heart swell with a joy she could barely contain. Arthur, beside her, smiled subtly, as if he knew a secret that others were only beginning to discover. After a moment of hesitation, Edward Darcy stood up, looking at his eldest son with a new understanding. "Thomas has always been the true guardian of these lands. If Annabel accepts him, they have my blessing." Samuel Blackwood nodded slowly, and Margaret, with tears in her eyes, smiled at her daughter. "You have learned to love, after all, just not in the way we expected." In the fall of that same year, Thomas and Annabel married under an arch of wildflowers at the boundary where the two farms met. Arthur returned to the capital, carrying with him not only his studies, but also the promise of a future with the woman he truly loved. The old music box played softly on a nearby table, its sweet sound echoing through the fields as a reminder that some promises withstand the test of time, while others transform. Because in the end, love does not follow agreements. It follows the hearts that dare to meet. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.